Okay, we are now live.
We're now live. Okay.
Ok. Muy buenos días a todas y todos. Bienvenidos al tercer día de esta clase magistral sobre Ciencia Ciudadana, organizada por LIBER, la Asociación de Bibliotecas de Investigación Europeas, y la Biblioteca Hernán Santa Cruz de la CEPAL. Vamos a dar unos avisos antes de comenzar. Respecto de los subtítulos, favor activarlos en su idioma de preferencia haciendo clic en el pequeño icono que está en la esquina inferior derecha de su pantalla, el icono que dice CC. Además, pueden hacer sus preguntas a los ponentes en inglés o español a través del chat. Trataremos de responderlas al final de la sesión y durante la sesión de cierre al final de la jornada. Recomendamos unirse a Webex a través de la aplicación de escritorio. Si tienen problemas para ver la presentación, estamos también transmitiendo esta sesión en YouTube. La primera sesión de hoy, titulada Practicando la Ciencia Ciudadana, presentará 3 ejemplos de proyectos de ciencia ciudadana de bibliotecas de investigación.
Good morning and welcome to the last day of the Citizen Science Masterclass organized by LIBER and the Hernán Santa Cruz Library of ECLAC. A bit of information before we start. Captions, you can turn it on in your preferred language. Down in the left-hand corner, there's a speech bubble, and there's where you turn on the captions. You can ask speakers in English or Spanish as you want. Please put them in the chat during the talk and write who the question is addressed for. For the most seamless experience, we also recommend to use the WebEx application and join from your desktop. The first session today, titled Practicing Citizen Science, will highlight 3 examples from citizen science projects of research libraries. And with us today, we have Nell Coleman, a Library Citizen Science Engagement Officer from the University of Edinburgh, Stefan Wiederkehr, Head of Special Collections and Digitization from the Central Biblioteca Zurich, and Sebastian Harnacker, Project Assistant for OPUS, Open Urban Sustainability Hubs, from TU Vienna Library. And Nell Coleman, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you very much. So I'll just quickly say a little bit about this session, what we're about, and then I'll leap into my talk before I hand then over to Stefan. So this one is very hands-on, so I think there's been quite a lot of wonderful discussions, and yesterday especially, where I was able to join, about the abstract, the policy, about how we set things up, how we kind of get the basis and the foundations. This session is a lot more, how do we actually do it, and how can we as libraries, or we as institutions or individuals, contribute to citizen science directly? So we have 3 case studies coming from very different contexts, from Zurich, Vienna, and Edinburgh, where we're going to kind of just talk about our very specific instances. But I think in the questions, if you were then thinking like, well, how can this apply to my institution? I really encourage you to be like, well, what can we do to translate it across? So with that, I will share my screen, and can you please let me know when it is sharing, because I can no longer see, and then I'll get started. There we go. Is that good?
Yes.
Perfect, thank you.
Perfect.
So the focus I'm going to be looking at is the heritage collections and how we've been using those in citizen science, because I think there are some novel and exciting ways that they can be used that aren't often represented. So some of you may have come to my talk yesterday, so I apologise for any repetition, but I'm going to take a slightly different slant because I'm going to be focusing on the University of Edinburgh's context from the perspective of the heritage collections. I'm also going to introduce who I am, because I think that that can kind of give you an idea of, if, for example, you want a member of staff to be doing this, who they might be, who can work with heritage collections and participatory research. So I'm Dr. Nell Coleman, pronouns they, them. I'm as mentioned, the Library Participatory Research and Citizen Science Engagement Officer. Small note, I might be referring to citizen science as participatory research throughout. If I do, apologies. They mean the same thing to us. It's simply that our research profile describes it as participatory research. So it confuses our researchers if we say citizen science and we mean participatory research. Same thing. My background is actually philosophy and history of science, so I had methodology background, and I worked a lot in engagement and social activities where we branch out with the sciences and also look at how we can kind of explain research and work with research with the general public. I then retrained after being a little bit of research for a little while in heritage collections. And so I have these two sides to my background. I have, or three sides really. I have the research side where I looked at methodology. I have the engagement side where I worked with communities. And I have the heritage collections side where I worked with heritage collections and focused actually on citizen science with the collections during the masters. My role at the university is to develop the library's role in this space. And so yesterday I gave an outline of what that meant. Here we're looking really like the hands-on stuff, how we can actually do the citizen science, how we work with our research partners and how we use our heritage collections as part of that. I'm based within the open research team, so I do have advocacy aspects to my work. So I do also use the heritage collections to promote the uptake of participatory research. And so I'm based within library research support. The way our library is structured means that we actually have multiple teams. We have library research support, heritage collections, we'll talk about, digital library, general collections, and the academic support librarians, who are the only ones with librarians in their job title, which confuses a lot of people, but we all work for the library. Heritage collections wise, I work very, very closely with them. That master's I described was actually with them. So I have very close contacts with them and I'm often working with them on site all the time. So it's kind of, these teams aren't very siloed. We work together and it's more of a formality where we're based. Participatory research skews towards the small scale, high participation, 10 to 20 people doing really highly invested work, co-producing methodologies, working together to direct the citizen science research. And there's a great deal of health focus, and that's actually really important because we're very lucky here with our collections, which we'll come on to in a second. We also work with marginalized groups quite a lot, and a lot of young people, because we have a big education school, and these are all participatory research-based areas. And there is a strong track record of digital humanities. We are working within the library to develop infrastructure and policies to support this type of research, but it is early days. There's loads of work we need to do. Like if we're working with a marginalized community, how do we make them feel welcome in quite an intimidating building? I'm actually going to quickly skip back. That's the building. Oop, there we go. Slightly brutalist to an extreme. You know, it's not very welcoming. So how do we make sure people feel comfortable coming in? What do the heritage collections include then? So this is the stuff I'm going to talk about, how we can work with, the exciting materials that we house. And you probably will have something within your libraries that could also be equally exciting. So these are huge collections. They're incredibly vast. There's the art collection, there's the health archives, and that's very important. That's the largest health archive in the UK. It's the Lothian Health Services Archive, and it houses all of the National Health Service records from about 1950, well, since the inception of the NHS, but also records from before that era. Rare books, archives and manuscripts, musical instruments in a museum as well. And we also have 40,000 digitized images available online, a lot of which are under a Creative Commons license. The catalogue isn't always clear, so if you look at them and you're like, oh, I'd like to use that image, just drop us an email and we can let you know. So these are really huge collections, and traditionally they've been used in traditional ways. You come to the reading room, you consult them, you look at them, maybe for an engagement activity, and in exhibitions, and they do brilliant work with that. The actual heritage collections are distributed across multiple sites, and this is, again, it's really important. Like, how do you use them? What is the infrastructure you have in place? So we have the Centre for Research Collections. It's on the top floor of the library, and that's where we have that reading room where people can consult the materials. But there's also 2 teaching rooms and a collections display space. And the key thing is, in one of those teaching rooms, you're allowed food and drink, not whilst there's collections in there, but that is actually really important for this kind of work if you're inviting people in. So that's a really powerful tool we have in our arsenal. We also have a small reading room in New College Library, and that deals with divinity and more of the religious texts access, but also a lot of the rare books. We have the Music Museum, which is regularly doing engagement events and has some amazing musical instruments in there, and the Scottish Studies Archive. So there's a huge amount of oral histories there. So you can go in there and listen to these oral histories and so forth, and oral recordings of folk tales and things. Just to give you a bit of wow picture, a lovely little collage I mocked up for you. There's a large number of pictures of cows. Don't really know why, but it's because the vet school took them. So lots of university records, but kind of diversity. Within those, we have sculptures. It's Charlie the horse on the bottom right. A young person group I worked with named the horse in a very unimaginative way. The nuns at the top left are from the health archives. They're to do with LGBTQ health and well-being. We have scientific illustrations. There's also Alexander Fleming's petri dish from when he was developing antibiotics. Very, very diverse collection. Right. So what are we actually doing with them, and how does it fit with citizen science and participatory research? That's a really key question. And I think there's some obvious answers and some less obvious, and I want to focus on the less obvious. So I'm going to start off with a little dichotomy. This is just for you to help think about the collections. This isn't strict, it's simplistic. And in reality, it's more than just a spectrum, it's a complexity. But let's talk about it in terms of intrinsic versus instrumental use for collections in your research. So an intrinsic role is kind of the classic role. We're looking at the intrinsic value of the items. We're exploring the items themselves. The research is about the collections. The participants in this kind of citizen science project are looking at the collections and what the collections can tell us. They're the focal point of it. And there's been some amazing citizen science projects with this, right? You might know about Old Weather from the Maritime Museum in London, where they crowdsourced people kind of taking out the records. And then with that, they got data from these naval records about the climate in 100 years ago and how it has changed, and they can monitor these things. They get loads of really valuable data by a citizen science project looking at those collections. Transcribe Bentham, even more focused on the collections, taking the texts and asking people to help transcribe it. You also get co-curated exhibitions. So the Science Museum in London, for example, brought a group of LGBTQ young people in to help them make sure that they got the language right in an exhibition they were having with that, and so they worked together with that. Citizen science, I mean, effectively it's the same thing. It's participatory co-design of an arts-based output. Structurally, you might say it's not a research output, but you can also see a similar thing occurring in, for example, arts-based research. So it does overlap. And you'll also find similar kind of work where people maybe with oral history projects kind of really come in and they use the collections as a basis for those oral history projects. But that's where we get into the overlap. So traditionally, this is the role that played in citizen science. Is hugely impactful. Like, there's nothing wrong with this. I actually really want to emphasize that this is an option. Digital humanities is where this is often held. But what we do here, because of our research profile, is we look more at the instrumental role. What can these collections do outside their intrinsic functions? What can they do when we say, well, let's divorce kind of the histories of these items as they have been used and see how they can fit into research projects which have topics that do not have a direct and immediate relationship to them, or do have a relationship to them, but the focal point isn't learning about those items. So I will give examples, do not worry, but they can play a whole number of roles in the research regardless. And sometimes it really doesn't matter what the items are, and sometimes it really, really does. But the point is, the collections are there to play an instrumental role to achieve another end. And this opens up the scope. You're no longer just looking at digital humanities, you're looking at medical research, you're looking at social sciences, you're looking at education, you're looking at the arts and the history of art. All of these things, well, actually history of art would be quite common, physics, all of these things where you might be using them. So they can be used as engagement tools. So they can ground participants in the research. They can help them feel welcome. They can help them understand what the research is about. They might become educational tools. You might use an item to explain a difficult concept. You might use it as a prompt to prime your participants to think about things in a certain way, which will then help you go forward and continue to do your research. You might use them for co-creative exercises. Typically reproductions, you don't want to be cutting up an artwork to use in a collage, but it might help the participants communicate their ideas or communicate their concepts in a much clearer way than they could do, for example, if you ask them to speak to you. They might not like that form of communication, but it can also play numerous other roles. So when you're thinking about this, what I'm going to ask you to do is think about these 3 questions. We're then going to come to the examples, and then I'm going to give you a few more examples for you to think about, and think about, maybe practically speaking, how would you use these collections items? So step 1, what is the role for the collections? What do our collections lend themselves to? You look at your collections, how large and diverse is your collection? What are the emergent themes? How do they associate with the research profile of your university? What form do the collections take? Are they physical? Are they digital? What restrictions are there on those collections? So it could be data protection, it could be dignity and respect. For example, I'm saying divorce the meaning from these items is sometimes a really powerful tool. Don't do that if it's a text from the divinity collection. That's disrespectful. There might also be other instances where it's talking about from the health archives, where you want to really focus on the meaning of those items. So if what you want to do involves that divorce, don't do it. But a lot of the items, like artworks, you can just say, oh, that's just a really pretty picture. In which case it's fine to do it. Data protection for the health archives as well. Don't use stuff with that. You know, the very basic things we all know about. But it's good to keep that in mind when you're starting to do this planning. Do the collections present any safety concerns? Like, I mean, I don't need to tell you this. If it's got arsenic all over it, don't do a handling exercise with it. Right. Example 1. So keeping all of those things in mind. We worked with an HIV-related project, Unseen Hands. We were working with the health archives. So we were going, well, what can we do with these health archives that can support this? And the researchers were like, yes, how can you help us? They were working with a very small group of lived experience people who have HIV, and they were thinking about the question of destigmatization and how we can target healthcare for them. And they wanted them to help guide them, to guide the research and guide the practices. So we have had a few events with them. And in those events, we invited the people with lived expertise to come in, and we used the switchboard collection. The poster on the right is possibly the least problematic one of that era. Like, a lot of those promotional materials were just downright disrespectful and have a huge amount of issues, and were stigmatizing at the same time as trying to achieve their ends. The collections could be handled by the participants. They were magazines, they were pamphlets and things, and so they could be looked through. And this was really important. So they felt they could come in, they could explore these collections, and then they could use that to go, well, we want you to think about this is wrong with the language, this is good with the language. And these are one of the many roles that the collections played. It meant that the participants, who then created an artwork collaging these materials, felt comfortable coming in. It takes about 3 to 5 years before they have an insight, feel comfortable sharing their knowledge with researchers. So making sure they feel comfortable is such an important aspect, and collections can do that. It gives them a sense of belonging, of power, and it's just a creative exercise. So it's a lot less intimidating than a formal activity. It also allowed them to prime and prompt themselves to think about how it could be used. Number 2, what needs do our research projects have? So we just saw Unseen Hands. I just explained the needs they had. They wanted to have something to prime and prompt discourse between researchers and people who do not feel comfortable talking to researchers, who do not necessarily feel comfortable coming into university settings, and rightly so. They're intimidating places, and they haven't always been respected by institutions. But you need to look at the research strengths of the institution. What is going well? Who can be your researcher partner in the medical school or physics? How many participants do these projects normally have? Is it feasible? Do we need to use digital collections? Do we need to use physical collections? What do they need support with, and how might they want to collaborate? Maybe they don't need your support, in which case that's great, but they might really need your help with something. And maybe the collections can help you help them. Do we have our own questions that we'd like to address? And could a participatory method fit with this? So next one, Generation Scotland. I realise I'm running reasonably low on time, so I will be quick. Generation Scotland. This is a project working with young people across Scotland, and they had a new app that was coming out, and the app was co-designed by by a group of young people between 12 and 18 years of age. One of them is to the right. And they co-designed the app because what they needed was about, I can't remember how many thousand of young people across Scotland to use the app. during school time to say, I've been on this app and I feel really, really sad because I've been on my phone for 3 hours, or I feel really happy I've been on my phone for 3 hours. It was exploring loneliness and digital isolation and how digital age has improved or worsened mental health. So they co-designed the app with young people. The thing they needed, though, was some way of recruiting thousands of young people across Scotland. How do you get them to then download this app and use it consistently? And so they needed third sector organizations to come in and support them. So we co-designed an exhibition with the young people who did the app. We had that out there, and suddenly this was a promotional activity where we had really significant members of the local governance. We had people from Youth Scotland, youth groups and things like that coming in, learning about the project and interacting with the young people so they could really see the value of it. And then from there, it was easier to reach out and recruit participants. Finally, third question, what kind of access infrastructure do we have? This is so important. I mentioned we're on the 6th floor of the main library, that terrifying concrete building. We have barriers at the front entrance. We have a limited number of emergency access and exits and things like that. We have policies for a number of young people and when they're allowed in the library. What are all of those things that might block you or enhance your work? Case study, the challenges. It's an intimidating building. Our spaces are designed with a reading room. We can't be too noisy. Some groups we want to work with want to put music on. So we need to make sure we book a room further away from that. Our collections can't leave the collection spaces. So we have to do it on the 6th floor or in the museum or in one of the other reading rooms. And some of them don't allow food and drink, which is really important. So we have to introduce new mechanisms to make people feel welcome. We might want to just say, okay, we'll do it online and do it digitally. Or ultimately, and we've done this a few times, to say, yeah, this is too risky. This might not help with the nature of research we're doing. Let's just not do it and work with the collections. And that's always an option in participatory research or citizen science. Sometimes it's better just not to do it. So a quick game, a couple of minutes. I'm going to go through, I've got 3, but we'll do 2 maybe, because these are what items that have actually been selected by researchers who are now using these items. Well, if you held these items at your institution, given the situation you're in, how might you use them? So number 1, Gay Scotland magazine. And this was one of my favourite researchers' examples. So these are classified adverts from a 1990s gay magazine from the Health Archives. And as you can imagine, they're quite graphic and quite explicit as to what they're talking about. There's about 20 of them. They can all be handled and touched by visitors. Their archives have been digitized. They're freely available online. My question for you, and throw it in the chat because I'd love to see what you think. How could these be used in research? And I'll give you one to start. One of the mental health researchers said he wanted to do found poetry with his participants. Found poetry is where you just pick random bits that were meaningful to you to draw it all together as a priming exercise for further collaborative work with them in terms of interpreting data that they'd collected through questionnaires and things. And so it's this idea of a quick kind of like get you into the right headspace of thinking this stuff. This stuff would be great for that. I don't know what's come from that, but he was very excited about it. In fact, he made a public event, 10 of us to do this found poetry, which was terrifying to me. 2, The Painted Lady, small artwork, contemporary art collections, part of a longer series, lots of them. There's loads of photographs of them, but it's very, very fragile and it can't be handled except by collection specialists. What do you think you could do with this? I'm not going to give you an example for this. I want you to come up with it. Just have a think. In your institution, how could this be used in research as just a tool? It doesn't matter where the Painted Lady is from necessarily, although it is part of a feminist artwork, so that might give you some guidance. But is there anything else you could think of? Does it relate to social sciences, medical health? What could it do? And then we have a geological map of Scotland, but I will wrap up there to make sure we can kind of move on quickly, and I don't want to take too much of your time. So you can support or undertake participatory research both on and with the collections. So intrinsic value on the collections, hugely valuable, but it's not the whole story. You can research with the collections. You can look at research that is not collections focused and go, how can we support you with these collections? And don't overlook that possibility because it's very, very rich. Their use in this way is hugely beneficial to the collections. You get new people coming in and actually there's opportunities to expand your catalogue, look at new insights on it. And so the research with the collections can feed into research on the collections. It also just promotes your collections as access points. And when planning, think about the items themselves, the research context of your institution, and the constraints you've got imposed by your own resources and infrastructure. And with that, I'll wrap up. So thank you so much, everyone. And I think that means I hand over to you, Stefan.
Great, thank you. So I will also share my slides. I guess you can see them now.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. In my talk, I will outline why the Zentralbibliothek Zürich, the ZB, is involved in citizen science and share our experience on how successfully initiating citizen science projects in the humanities. This Zentralbibliothek has been the state, city, and university library of Zurich for over 100 years, and it is one of the largest libraries in Switzerland. Thanks to its predecessor institutions, it has considerable historical holdings. Today, new acquisitions focus on the humanities and social sciences, as well as Ciencia, that is works from and about Zurich. Why is citizen science an issue for the ZB? In the strategy period 2021 to 2024, the Zentralbibliothek has set itself the goal of raising its profile as a partner in research. At the same time, as a state and city library, it has always been a core task of the Zentralbibliothek to mediate between science and the public. In its dual function as a public library and a university library, the Zentralbibliothek is predestined to make new forms of interaction between citizens and scientists possible, and to put citizen science into practice in the humanities and the social sciences. Therefore, one of the Zentralbibliothek's strategic initiatives has included engaging in citizen science projects, developing its own activities for this purpose, and seeking partnerships based on a participatory concept of open science. The more concrete goals of the Zentralbibliothek's citizen science activities include making holdings accessible, that is, improving metadata through crowdsourcing, raising the visibility of selected digitized holdings, as well as retaining customers and acquiring new ones. So we call our users very often customers. So if I say customer, I mean the library users. There are other local players at Zurich. The Swiss Federal Institute of Technology, ETH, and the University of Zurich run a joint agency called Citizen Science Zurich. This agency teaches citizen science methodology for faculty members and other researchers. The library of the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology has successfully run crowdsourcing projects in its image archive before our own library started to plan its citizen science activities systematically. In this situation, Zentralbibliothek chose a complementary approach. That means that we did not address those fields the other local players did already, but looked for new fields of activities and niches. Thus, we have a focus on our own collection. That's very close to what Nell said before. And this for two reasons. First of all, it is quite typical for memory institutions such as libraries, archives, or museums to engage the citizen scientists' interest for their holdings. And second, methodological support for faculty members figuring out their own research questions seem to be less promising than approaching citizen scientists. with a task that is fun for them. How is the Zentralbibliothek involved in citizen science activities? We have decided to approach citizen science in the form of a project on two levels. On the one hand, the project team was to work on the topic for 4 years. The staff should acquire competences, conduct campaigns with a coherent marketing concept to build a community of citizen scientists, and the project team also should maintain systematic contacts with other relevant institutions. On the other hand, in sub-projects with a shorter duration, the team has carried out concrete citizen science activities and gained experience with different approaches and project designs. The conception of the overall project and the sub-projects is based on the conviction gained from studying the experience of other institutions that citizen science is a social phenomenon in which community building and community management are the decisive factors for success. For this reason, established IT solutions have been used, and the additional funds we had have been invested primarily in staff for marketing and communication. Campaigning is coordinated in terms of content and time, and it is implemented cross-media by a project member hired especially for this task. In the following, I present the entire spectrum of the Zentralbibliothek's citizen science activities up to date, and I arrange my presentation according to activities. In the first type of activities, citizen scientists georeferenced old maps which allowed a comparison with modern ones. You can see here on the left side an old map, and on the right-hand side the same map after georeferencing and rectifying. All three sub-projects on georeferencing were very well received. In just 7 weeks, the citizen scientist indexed more than 2,500 old Zurich and Swiss maps that had been provided for the sub-project through space and time via the tool Georeferencer and Old Maps Online. 4 weeks were even sufficient for the approximately 2,900 maps from a campaign called Magnificent Atlases of the 15th to the 17th centuries in 2003. In less than a month too, the citizen scientists georeferenced the second portion of more than 2,200 maps from the Magnificent Atlases in this year. Gamification elements that promote friendly competition among citizen scientists are integrated into the georeferencer. This made it possible to use continuously updated ranking lists and progress bars for campaigning without additional effort by the project team. These sub-projects also revealed the so-called skewed distribution of participation, which is very typical for crowdsourcing projects. A few people did most of the work. The most active participant through space and time alone set nearly 8,000 reference points, almost 28%. And the four most active registered citizen scientists together set more than 60,000 reference points, which is about 60%. In the second and third campaigns, more people took part overall, and the distribution was somewhat more even. Several projects deal with the transcription of historical documents using the transcription tool of eManuscripta, the digital platform for manuscript material from Swiss libraries and archives. In the first sub-project, citizen scientists transcribed letters from and to the writer and statesman Heinrich Zschokke. The image scans of 260 such letters were already online on the eManuscripta platform when the campaign began. What was missing, however, was a machine-readable full text. Experience from other libraries and archives has shown that the initial hurdle for transcribing is high. Therefore, the project team selected a rather small but important collection for the first campaign. Further reasons in favor of the Zschokke letters were the expectation of some basic attention for his person on the occasion of his 250th birthday, the existence of an organized community in the form of the Heinrich Zschokke Society, and the fact that unpublished transcriptions were available for some of the letters, which only had to be transferred to the tool for publication. Ranking lists and the progress bars were updated manually at regular intervals. 2 face-to-face events were held at Zentralbibliothek in order to provide a community experience and to familiarize the citizen scientists with the handling of the IT tool. The other transcription projects have the same technical foundation, that is the eManuscripta and the integrated transcription tool, but they differ in their campaigning strategies and target groups. The most successful sub-project In the most successful sub-project, the central but unique reference work, only available in handwritten form, was to be completely transcribed by the citizen scientists. I'm speaking of the Promptuarium Genealogicum written by Karl Keller-Escher. This sub-project targets the well-organized and highly committed community of genealogists. The citizen scientists produced a complete transcription of the 7 volumes and over 2,800 pages of the Promptuarium Genealogicum. In addition to the usual ranking lists, the joint performance is also displayed here. The progress visualization is based on the game Battleship and motivates people to work on as many families as quickly as possible, with the effect that the citizen scientists have taken on the families with the fewest pages first. For the sub-project that is least successful, I did not prepare a slide. Here, citizen scientists are transcribing the correspondence of the founder of Swiss art history and cultural heritage preservation, Johann Rudolf Rahn. The project team chose a different approach to the correspondence of the Zurich music publisher, composer, and music educator Hans-Georg Nägeli and his son Hermann. The citizen scientists were invited to process only 100 letters, preparing the so-called ground truths for a handwritten text recognition model. In this sub-project, the gamification element motivating the citizen scientists was a fixed publication rhythm of 5 letters per week and the challenge to transcribe the selected letters in a short time. The progress of the joint effort was reported in an area chart. You see that on the right-hand side, the brown part of the graphics are the letters that are published but not transcribed. So we wanted that this brown part is as small as possible all the time. The Adventure in Time for Schools sub-project offers teaching materials in digital form. The teaching units focus on original documents from the Zentralbibliothek. They consist of a worksheet for pupils and separately published explanations for teachers published under a Creative Commons license. Since 2021, 37 teaching units have been released, including on topics such as life during a pandemic, Zurich in 1918, Switzerland and the slave trade, or girls' education in the 18th and 19th century Zurich. So far, the teaching units were penned by employees of the Zentralbibliothek. Teachers from 25 Zurich schools were given the opportunity to comment on the published materials and were asked to submit topic requests. A feedback workshop was also held with teachers at our premises in 2023. The interaction with the teachers is of paramount importance. After all, this sub-project can only be successful in the long term if it succeeds in meeting the needs of the teachers as defined by the curriculum with ZB materials. To this day, it remains a desideratum that teachers themselves write contributions to the Adventures in Time for Schools. It must be left open what incentives the Zentralbibliothek could use to effectively encourage this. We haven't found the lever yet. Zurich Film Goes Wikipedia went beyond crowdsourcing too. The fall of 2021, the project team organized a writing workshop using a participatory format from the Wikiverse. The background of this sub-project is the fact that Zurich is a central site for Swiss filmmaking and that the Zentralbibliothek has relevant holdings, in particular a collection of screenplays and scripts that is unique in Switzerland. The event started with a panel discussion with a well-known Zurich film director. Afterward, an experienced member of the Wikipedia community gave an introduction on how to contribute to Wikipedia. As a result of this long weekend, 16 new Wikipedia articles on Zurich filmmaking were written on site, and 6 existing ones were improved. These figures imply a success. It should be noted, however, that despite this panel discussion with a well-known Zurich director at the start of the weekend, it was not possible to mobilize more than a small circle of people who were not active in Wikipedia before our event. It's not clear for us what role the concept and the topic of the event played in this, compared to the tightening of measures to combat the pandemic in the run-up of that event in 2021. Finally, we offered 2 research groups a stage to present their projects and organized joint workshops on our premises. So we did not initiate these projects, but we gave a stage. One of the projects analyzed how Swiss newspapers covered the topic of forced fostering, that is, child removal from unmarried mothers and minority groups by the Swiss government. Most of the participants of that project were persons affected themselves. They wanted to look back in a scholarly way on their own destiny. We gave them the opportunity to use our marketing channels and to present their findings to a broader public on our premises. This project was run by researchers from the University of Zurich and some other institutions of higher education. The other project of this type was Bullinger Digital. Bullinger Digital, the critical edition of the correspondence of the Swiss reformer Heinrich Bullinger, who is the successor of Ulrich Zwingli, has a long history. The corpus of Bullinger's correspondence is one of the largest of the 16th century, and it is of high importance for both theology and history. Recently, the edition turned into a digital form, which allowed also seeking support of citizen scientists in correcting transcriptions and improve named entity recognition. We opened our computer classrooms to a workshop where citizen scientists were introduced into their task technically, as well as in terms of content. This project is run together by theologians and computer linguists of the University of Zurich. The Zentralbibliothek Zürich does not conduct one individual research project in the form of a citizen science project, as is typical for research groups at universities. Rather, it understands citizen science as a field of action that leads to a variety of interrelated and coordinated activities. In carrying these out, the Zentralbibliothek has gained experience with various forms of citizen science in the field of humanities for 4 years now. Taking into account other local players, we resigned from the idea of methodological support and teaching citizen science methods to researchers, which might be a promising strategy in other local contexts. We did, however, provide a stage for public events for 2 research groups working together with citizen scientists. Yet the clue was making a virtue out of necessity and focusing on our collections. Opportunities particularly arise from the local focus of the Turicensia, as it is motivating to citizen scientists that they can share their specific local knowledge, make it available to research, and feel recognized for their work. With high-level digitization, the Zentralbibliothek allows citizen scientists to participate in projects regardless of time and place. However, face-to-face events are important. They are important for community building and ensuring a lasting commitment. So the citizen scientists are regularly invited to the Zentralbibliothek, for example, to share results and to accept thanks for their work, for the work they have done. In addition, one of the Zentralbibliothek's great strengths as a library is the stability of its infrastructures. Unlike research projects whose funding is time limited and whose staff need to look for a new job at the end of the project, the Zentralbibliothek as a memory institution can guarantee the longevity of the results of its citizen science activities. After 4 years, the Zentralbibliothek observed a positive outcome. The project team succeeded in creating new participatory formats and opening up dialogue with the library users in a novel way. I thank you for your attention. And I guess I hand over to Sebastian.
Okay, hello. I'm trying to share my screen. I just have to go into the
Sebastian, do you see the share icon?
I do, but I have a Mac, and I think it's possible that I quickly have to go out of the meeting and rejoin, and
Perhaps
because
we
I can't do that, change the settings in the meeting while I'm in the meeting. So I'll be right back. I'm very sorry.
If you would like, we could share for you the presentation and you says.
Yeah, we could also do that. Yeah, maybe it's easier.
Jaime, could you do that, please? Jaime?
Yes. I will.
Thank you. Do you see your
Okay.
presentation,
I see it, thank you.
Sebastian?
So I'll just say next, and I'm really sorry you have to take over for me here.
Perfect.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm based in Vienna at the Technical University here. And I thought it's really nice what you did now about the positioning right from the start a bit, because I do think it's really interesting how the citizen science researchers or practitioners, where they come from, actually, because nobody of us actually learned anything about this in their student years, I guess. So originally I'm a mechanical engineer who then turned to the humanities. So I have a university degree in Slavonic studies and in comparative literature. And then I was working at the Faculty of Social Sciences at the University of Vienna, so another university. And there we worked a lot with participatory methods already, although back then I didn't know about the term citizen science. That only I only became aware of that when I started to work in this project that I'm in now. So basically we were doing citizen science without actually knowing that we were doing citizen science. And I think it's the same for a lot of people, because it's such a wide term, and like, where's the boundary between participatory action research and citizen science? It's really hard to tell. So yeah, that's kind of my background. Maybe next slide, then we can go through the project. I'll be talking a bit about, we have a very hands-on approach here at the TU Wien. So we do not have a citizen science hub as of yet. The way we started engaging in citizen science is by partnering with the Faculty of Architecture and Urban Planning in this citizen science project. So we are kind of like having this learning by doing approach, and then through the learnings we have in this project and the project outcomes, we want to establish this citizen science hub, or like, if you want to call it hub, it's highly debated here also at the library, what if we need another hub, or just we want to offer it as a service to our to the faculties as well as to the public. So I'm gonna be talking a bit about what the project itself, and later maybe to open up the view a bit to a more general description. So our project is a EU-funded project. It's called OPUS, Open Urban Sustainability Hubs. And our consortium is in Vienna, in Austria, Delft in the Netherlands, Barcelona in Spain, and TalTech is in Tallinn, Estonia. So very nicely spread across Europe. We're focusing on the GLAM network, we call it, like galleries, libraries, archives, museums. And we want to take a look at how these institutions can support sustainable change in urban planning. And we're so it's the research focus is very much at the architecture and urban planning view, and this like science of citizen science is like on a meta level above all the actual hard data research output that we're gonna have. So we have this hands-on approach. So we're co-leading the citizen science projects. Actually, it's 2 that we did in Vienna, and but only one I'm gonna talk about specifically today. And what we do in this project is like we have this role of communicating between the researchers, between students are involved as well, and of course then the broad public, the citizen scientists, the co-researchers. And we offer also the library as a space, but also like on a meta level, the library as a infrastructure in general, whatever you want to put under this term. So next slide, please. I'm gonna tell you now a bit about this citizen science pilot we did here in Vienna. So Vienna is known to be one of the most affected cities in Europe from climate change, from urban heat, and we have this urban heat islands effect that maybe some of you know, like in densely populated urban areas with a lot of sealed surfaces and little green, temperatures in the summer are way higher than in greener neighborhoods, and also in the night the temperatures don't get lower anymore. So we focus on here we focus on not the urban planning itself. So what can we do? Can we like tear out the streets and put grass there and trees? But we want to take a look about the social aspects of urban heat. So what is this actually meaning for the people who live in these neighborhoods? What communities are affected way more than others? Because we do know from other research projects in Vienna at different universities that the most affected areas from this urban heat island problem are areas that have a lower socioeconomic status. So the people there are already more vulnerable, and then now they have to suffer more because of this urban heat, like on top of everything else. So we wanted to have this like not just sustainability as environmental topic, but also as a social topic. And we've been working together like right from the start. It was not a citizen group who came to us and told us like, hey, we have this problem, can you help us with it? So it was in this way, it was more a top-down approach, because we went to stakeholders in these districts, we went to the city, and we went to some civil society organizations and said like, hey, we're doing this project, we have these resources, and how can we be an add-on on existing planning projects from the city? So there was already it was very important for us from the beginning that it's not just doing this for our own research, but also we already wanted to kind of connect to ongoing planning processes. So we have this real world, real life, real effect already. Like, even though it's just a pilot project, we can already gather valuable data for the city. So it was very important to onboard all these stakeholders and multipliers right from the beginning, to not like come to them after our project ended and be like, hey, we have this data now. Maybe you can use it, maybe not, but here you go. And I think it's very important that you have this connection right from the beginning. So otherwise, change is very hard to do, because we do work a lot with like on this policy level in the city. So if you're not connected right from the beginning to the district management, to the district head of the districts, etc., then it's very hard to get attention like after the project is finished. So, and what did the library actually do for this project? What resources we used is mostly for recruitment, because we all know citizen science. Sometimes it's very hard to find people who are willing to put the time and effort in this and do it all in their free time. Like, some are very enthusiastic about the thing, but to reach a lot of people, you have to be very active. So it's also something we learned. Of course, we tried to. We had this advertisement on our homepage and through social media, through the district managements, we call it in Vienna. So the organizations who already are in the neighborhoods and doing events there. But through all these digital channels, we had zero applicants for our citizen science project. So what we then did was we started with field work. We just went there, we talked to the people, we identified like a very narrow group that we want to work with for the start, and this was like elderly people because they're more affected by heat. So we went to this senior citizens clubs they have in Vienna, like where senior citizens can just gather, and it's against loneliness. They can play cards, they can do simple workouts, or have like some bingo nights and stuff like that. So you just go there and you talk to the people, and this is something that takes a lot of time. Like, I would say like 2 months just to build trust, to get some people to join you. You have to go there regularly so they don't forget, because they're not reachable online. They don't have a mobile phone. Maybe most of them didn't, at least. So this is something that a researcher simply does not have the time to put that much effort in recruiting participants for his research. I think probably it is safe to say that nobody does. So let's do the next slide, please. And also, with recruitment, also something that I think librarians are more like a good choice to actually do this kind of work, is because, I mean, I was there talking to the people, and only then I realized, like, okay, this is an opportunity. I'm not a social worker. This is an opportunity to like go outside your academia bubble and actually talk to the people and see like what people think about academia that haven't been part of it for. I've been part of it for 15 years now, and it was quite surprising. Also, quite surprising that so many stereotypes turned out to be true, and also quite surprising how little people differentiate between research and between politics and other institutions. Like they didn't care if we're from some political party, from a university, or from the city itself. It's all mixed up. So it was a very very interesting experience to actually see, like, okay, how do we have to communicate to those people? And it's a constant adaptation. From every meeting we had with the people, we learned more about, okay, maybe this approach is not working at all. We have to be like, need to find a lower threshold level to explain what a university actually does, and what we as a library can actually do for them. So just this just came to my mind about this whole onboarding process. And this pilot we did about the heat in the city, I already mentioned, like, the language and communication, you have to choose it accordingly. We started with senior citizens, then 1 year later, or like half a year later, we got additional funding to also do it with schools. And then, of course, it's a whole, you have to change like all the materials you have to maybe a different communication. Like in German, you have this polite form Sie and the informal form Du, like you, or in English. So it's little things, but it's also a lot of work that you have to do to just put together all these materials for a citizen science project. Like this whole science communication aspect is something that is often underestimated by researchers and often put like pushed back to the very last minute. And it's we think it's very important from what we learned that you have an effective communication method right from the start. And that's where a library can help researchers like already think on that and already provide it for them when they actually apply for funding already. So, and what did we do? We had like, how did these workshops actually look like? Just a short overview. We had a mixed methods approach. It's called the micro stories approach. It's a social sciences method, and it's just about getting people to tell you experiences from the everyday life, and in this case connected to heat. And sometimes it's just like, yeah, when it's 35 degrees in summer, I can't do my shopping during the day, I have to do it in the nighttime. Or I can't take this path to come here to the supermarket because it's all in the sun and I can't take it, so I have to go along a way where is more shadow or something like this. This is like micro stories, and we use these micro stories later to just find out like, yeah, I have experienced something similar, and just like to raise awareness also with the school children, with the projects we did later. So maybe so they don't think about that senior citizens maybe they can't go out during the day in summer because they are afraid to collapse in the heat. And it's also like an awareness building on this issue of urban heat. And what was very important for us, so we did these workshops, and we also did like these walks, community walks. As you can see in this picture here, that the picture on the top is from one of the walks with the schools. It was in a park close to school, and we did have an infrared camera, like for taking thermal imagery. And you can see in the picture below, that's in our library. And there you can just see like it's a finger, and what happens to the finger after you hold it under the water for 1 minute. So to just, it was just a little game, but for kids, it was really, really nice to see, because most of them didn't know that such a camera exists and couldn't try it out in their school or wherever. So it doesn't take a lot of material. It doesn't have to be high tech. It's just very, very low threshold approach that we did with these methods. Like measuring temperature is not something super difficult. Okay, meteorologists might disagree, but if you just don't do it for like to have research data, but to have like a basis for discussion, it's not that much work. So, but what this picture below also shows is how important it is to have like a space to do these workshops, because what we also realized is that when we worked with schools, the kids behave different when they're in the classroom than when they went then later to the university library. So Nell already mentioned it's very important that libraries, they have a very valuable thing at universities, and this is space. It's a big fight for space in every university that I know in Vienna. And we do have all these workshop rooms, and also rooms where you can, where group rooms, where groups can work for something that they're interested in. And it's not exclusively for students and members of our university, but it's open to the public, which is also very important. Let's do the next slide, please. Maybe I have to hurry up. I'm really sorry. Okay, I'll skip the next steps because this is more about this research project, and I'm gonna do the next slide. I'm gonna wrap it up with a little summary of our learning so far. So how can we support communities to participate in citizen science projects? Like the first thing that we think is that we have a very valuable resource here, the libraries, which is us librarians. We have a very diverse background. We have like people who can do science communication. We have people who, we have research librarians who are very good in their field. And so all this knowledge that is already here in our library is actually, it's the perfect basis for building up a citizen science hub. So we don't have to hire new people for a citizen science hub because all the know-how is already here. We just have to make a little time in our schedules to put this one, this citizen science service also on top of our plate. Yeah, we do have maybe let's add here. Okay, let's accessibility. It's also what I already mentioned, like the library is a more accessible space than the faculties. So we know that there's a big difference between research libraries and public libraries, because we know our user group is like 2/3 scholarly, with a scholarly background. So the general public is only 1/3 of our users, which we try to open it up more by like having like the science communications events, to have like public readings, and also not public readings from some new published volume in mechanical engineering, but in more like popular science too. And very important is like I already mentioned, the space itself. So it is a public building. You can't just come in here. We know this concept of the third place, like that it gets more and more important to have like a place away from home, from work, where you can like pursue your interests, and the library is a very important place in this aspect. So that's why it also very much makes sense to have the citizen science services in a library. And infrastructure-wise, we provide a non-commercial consumption-free space. Consumption is a tricky issue, like Nell said, because in our library you also are not allowed to drink drinks or food into the reading rooms. But okay, at least you can sit there without consuming anything. That's what I mean. Yeah, it is from our experience that we had sometimes that's a very important thing, that a lot of communities lack just the space to meet, to have like a space that they don't have to pay for, they can just use. And this sounds very simple, but it's actually a very, very important thing in a densely urban environment. That's also maybe through gentrifications, more and more public spaces have to close. Like some communities can't afford the rents anymore for their society headquarters or something like this. It's what we see, like some ateliers or studios, they have to shut down, etc., etc. So having this space in a city, and the technical university is very central in the city, and so it's a very valuable asset that we can provide for researchers as well as the public. So for both. And to close now, I think maybe I'm already over my time, I didn't check. We think that citizen science is more about empowering the communities than educating the public. So we see there's science communication is a part of citizen science, but citizen science is not just science communications. And it's also not just crowdsourcing. So we see there has to be some social aspect to citizen science for us. That's our definition of the term in our library. And we see it as a service that we are providing to our users, as well as to our university members, to our researchers, to our students. And but to have this service like to empower like a long-lasting community engagement, we need to find ways to support bottom-up initiatives as well, and not just research projects. So we have these two approaches, and it's also always a negotiation between the rectorate of our university, because there is this one stream that says like, okay, the library is a university library. We have to provide the services mainly to university staff. And there's this another stream who says like, yeah, we have social responsibility in what we're doing with research, and technological universities often we don't have a social science department, etc. And we're very and we need to do more to engage with the public, to actually show them that technological universities do important work for the general good as well, and not just for industry and private sector. So yeah, for any questions, I'm still here later. And now I guess that's a question round. So thank you for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sebastian, for an interesting presentation, and also to Nell and to Stefan for interesting presentations. Very different projects you all share with us today. Now we will open for some questions from the audience. Feel free to share it in the chat. And there's one question for Sebastian. Did you do any specific training as a librarian with the library before running this citizen science project?
No. No, like I mentioned, the term citizen science was first introduced to me when I applied to this job. So I don't have any special training for citizen science, but I do have job experience in working with communities. Also, I volunteered in concert locations, so I do have a lot of experience in engaging with various groups of people, and I think that helps a lot if you want to do citizen science.
And this is a related question to everyone. In terms of skills and the team, how many people do you have in your citizen science teams? And what kind of skills do you think is essential to have in a library when starting a practical citizen science project?
I can quickly start because I'm still not muted. I think our team is just me. So I'm a full-time employee here with the citizen science project. And also the citizen science service we have is only funded through third-party funding. So it's not in our university budget. And it's still in negotiation if we can provide this service, like if I can provide this service full-time for longer than the project lasts, which is very difficult. But the way I see it, it's not really necessary to have such a big team that works exclusively on citizen science, because like I mentioned, we have such a diverse background at libraries that if just 5 people can make up like a little bit of time, like, I don't know, 5 hours a week, maybe. Okay, it's not a little, but then you can already provide a proper service. I think it doesn't really take like an insane amount of working hours. But
Thank you.
Maybe others see it differently.
Nell, do you want to add to this question?
So practically speaking, so as I suggested, little old me as well. So I'm in the same boat as Sebastian, but I am funded by the university and permanent full time. So luckily I have that stability, which is nice. In terms of my team, yeah, it is just me. I think, though, the answer is I kind of agree and I don't disagree, but I think it depends on the context and what you want to do. as a library with citizen science? Do you want to be directly running projects and so forth? And what niche does the library fill? And I think we actually have quite a lot of similarities. I was listening to your talk and you talk about the challenges and things like that, and like the community engagement focus. And I'm like, yeah, that's the role that the library is playing. And so what we actually need is a larger community engagement team. That's something we do need to expand into, because that's something that will support the researchers and facilitate that. But again, that's not just citizen science focus, that's building in that aspect of it, the recruitment, the making them feel comfortable working with them and so forth. But another library might choose to go full on methodological training, and they might be like, well, we're going to equip researchers to do this, in which case they might need a specialist in education, or they might be, no, we're going to just run citizen science projects. Essentially they might want to hire some researchers in. So it really depends, I think, on what the library wants to do. But libraries are very well placed to be bridges with communities. They are very well placed to do recruitment. I think both Stefan and Sebastian kind of emphasize that in what they do and what I've said we do. And so in which case, yeah, like you can get away with a very, very small dedicated citizen science team if other people within the library have capacity to lend their skills to your project. So,
Stefan, do you want to add to this?
If you ask about the team, we had some funding to give additional hours to staff that already works at our library. And most of that money we gave to marketing and communication, but we also gave it to the manuscript department or to the maps department some hours from time to time. And I think there, on the whole, there were between 2 and 3 full-time equivalents working at this project. But people that were already there, some worked in their normal time and some worked in their additional time for that. And as to the skills, I think if you work close to the holdings, to the collections as we did, you need people that know a lot about these collections, and you need people who know a lot about communication, community building, community management. This might be the same people, but very often these are not the same people. So you have to bring them together within the library and then to start the project with the citizen scientists and researchers.
Thank you. Yeah, and as we saw, they were very different projects, and I guess some of our audience might be interested in starting their own projects in their libraries. And what is the advice you would give to them, or some kind of key takeaway for starting and practicing citizen science, like a good lesson learned? It's a question for everyone.
I have a simple answer if you want. Find a researcher. Start with a researcher, especially if you're brand new to this field. Find someone who's already doing it at your institution or another one, and work with them, because you'll learn so much from starting with that basis point where you're working with someone, even if they're not a specialist in participatory research or citizen science, learning together with them. The other important thing is it can shield you as well. And this is really important if you're working with community groups, especially vulnerable ones, is that if you don't feel like you have the skill set to directly work with them to implement the appropriate safeguarding, for example, which is important even if they're not vulnerable groups, working with a researcher who has to go through the ethics approval process and knows how to navigate that and build in the appropriate safeguards makes it a lot easier for you rather than diving in at the deep end, because that's the thing with citizen science. It's not just a research project, it's a project working with people who aren't researchers and asking them to do research. It streamlines that whole process and gives you that lesson. So go out there and find someone and do the great strategy, which I heard described a moment ago. Have a cup of tea with them or a coffee or something, and sit down and chat with them and informally go out there and just talk with them and come up with some ideas together. You don't have to go it alone. like you'll find someone somewhere. And maybe I can speak for the others here. I'm happy to have emails and we can find someone for you together. Like, you know, like really just go out and reach out and get some support. Don't feel like you have to, as the library, dive in.
I agree with Nell. On the one hand, so find a researcher, but maybe that's the right answer if you're mostly interested in research results at the end of your project. I would have said, if I would have given the first answer, find the participants. Be sure that there is a target group for your project. So address the participants, find the citizen scientists. That's what we did, and I'm still happy with that.
Thank you very much. And what do you think are the biggest challenges to get started with citizen science in institutions in general? We did a survey some months ago here, and some of the answers that came up was, you know, lack of strategy on the national and institutional level, lack of funding. Like, in your opinion, from your point of view, what are the biggest challenges to get started in the first place?
I don't know. I think I wouldn't necessarily say it's about the funding, because we know that there can be a really good citizen science project on like a very small budget. I think there's a lot of examples for projects who started like with next to zero money, or with just like the initiative of one librarian, for example. We know it from the LIBER Citizen Science Working Group. There are examples like that. So I don't know. I think the money is not the issue. It's more like the finding, especially if you work with researchers, finding researchers who are willing to include the public in their research, because it does lead to a lot of new questions that they might not have experienced before. Like now we talked about the ethics thing, and we also supported the faculty we worked with this whole ethics screening process, and I also didn't know that it's so much work and what you all have to think about, especially when you work with children, of course. So yeah, find a researcher who is willing to include the public and not just say like, okay, I can write it in for, I don't know, to have like more chances to get this funding here. But actually, I just want to do my own research. They have to be really into it.
Stefan, Nell, do you want to add anything?
Maybe convince your boss. Be sure that you have support in your library. It was absolutely no problem in our library. Our director wanted to do citizen science, so it started top down. But I know from other libraries that people who have this idea to start citizen science projects, they are asked, why should we do that as a library? What sense does this make? It's not what we are paid for. And I think then it's really difficult if you don't have support within your institution. That's a great challenge. Then you need good arguments to start with it. And then I also think that funding is not the main problem. You can design projects with very few money, which are successful, and you have to design your project according to the local structures, according to funding, according to the opportunities. But you need support, mental support.
And if there is if there is resistance from your boss or research organization, because I understand that sometimes that can be an issue as well, how do you convince them? How do you get them on board?
I didn't have to convince my boss because she was already very convinced of citizen science, so I'm also very lucky. But I totally agree with Stefan. Like, you cannot do it alone. At some point you will need support. And we did these workshops and we had 5 people from our library present there to deal with such big groups for moderation and things. So at some point you will be overwhelmed with how much work it is to work to engage with the public. And so it's very good that you have the support to, okay, you can have more working hours here from other people also. Yeah.
Tell about successes of your neighbors. Tell about how much success it was in other libraries, and that you will top this success in your own library. So.
Neil, do you want to add anything?
I mean, a lot of it is just agreeing. I think the problem with this is all about context. So what are the big challenges and how do you convince your boss? Like for example, here we do have a lot of infrastructural changes that need to be made, despite the fact that everyone's on board and they hired someone to do citizen science, because there is that consequence of we like as has been mentioned, citizen science. There's a lot of unexpected extra work that appears, and you're like, oh, we need to do that now. And so there is convincing work to do. And what I found is, I think someone just, I think May Britt just made a good point in the chat of like, show how it brings the library funding, show how it can support communities, how it can fit with your university's mission as a overall, how it can fit into internal policies and procedures. These are all really important and valuable tools for kind of persuasion, but also, yeah, look at people doing amazing work and going, hey, we could be doing that here, and this is why it matters. So yeah, I think those are all really powerful tools if you want to convince people. And I do think convincing people to change their working patterns and change the policies is a big barrier in this area.
Yeah, and one thing is the in-house, but then there's the communities. How do you, and the citizen science participants, how do you engage with them and gain your trust and keep them motivated? How do you, recruit them and gain their trust? Who wants to answer?
Maybe I think for us it was already, it has to be considered already when designing your research project, because there's this perspective of the researcher, and of course the researcher, in our case, they want to be in contact with the city, and that means like that's the prestige for them. But we had to make sure that the participants also, the only reason they participated is because we tried to make them aware of that actually they can change something in their environment. There are methods of talking to policymakers, and this is a very important thing to do in my opinion, and for our project, to like make them see that their opinion actually matters. It's not just a survey, it's actually a way to engage with your community, with your neighborhood. And that's, for a lot of people, that's not so clear that there are ways to do that. Yeah.
Do you want to add anything, Neil or Stefan?
So again, it's kind of the context thing. So for us, like I mentioned, we work with the researchers directly, which is funny because this is why, you know, my instinct was to find a researcher, but because we partner with them, often we work with them and they already have a trusting relationship with the community group. Our role is more to support and sustain that trusting relationship. And that's because of the research profile here. Like I keep saying, it's with very marginalized, vulnerable communities. And so we don't have the infrastructure in the library to sustain those connections in a way that would be ethical. So it's much better for us to work with the researcher and help them to sustain those connections, because it's safer for everyone involved, but particularly the participants. But in sustaining them, we look to the ways we can not just give them the research output, what other things we can offer them. community reads, for example, we've created a briefing report for a community centre to send to the Scottish Parliament to lobby for their interests. So we look at all of these things that we can offer. Is there something we can do to publish something? Can they come to this exhibition? Can we help work with them in other ways? But can we just offer them a space to come and have a talk in an informal environment? And I think that's something that Sebastian was talking about, which is really powerful. So I'm kind of going to shut up now and say, Sebastian, please feed more information, because it sounded like this is right up your street.
Stefan, do you want to add anything?
I think Sebastian and Ned said the most important things. Maybe one sentence to recruiting. We tried to design our projects in a way that there was already an organized target group independently from us. So, for example, with these Choke letters, there was a Choke society. They have an address, they have a newsletter, they have a president. So you can approach them very easily. So we did not just write the text on our webpage, oh, we have a citizen science project, now come here. But we always had some group in mind that already was organized and was addressable. I think that's an important point with successful recruiting. And then if you have them, I say the same as my colleagues.
Thank you very much. My colleague Claudia would like to ask a question as well.
Yeah. For all of you, what do you think about inclusivity and accessibility of all those projects? What aspect or step have you or should be taken? Sebastian?
It's a very important topic, because I'm always talking from the perspective of my research project now, because we had this approach that we want to work with vulnerable groups in the city, but the groups who are the most vulnerable in the city are also the groups who have little to zero time for participating in a citizen science project on top of everything else they have to deal with. So we had in our project, in another pilot, we had a master student and she worked with single parents with an urban planning process in the neighborhood, and she talked to the single parents there because the needs of single parents, they have a higher demand on the public space because they have a lot of trip chains, etc. They are around the city all the time. But for her, it was incredibly difficult to find people who have the time to participate here. And then she changed her whole her whole setting. She had it online, and then she had talks with the public library that they can support her with taking care of the children while they are doing the workshop. So I think, yeah, with marginalized groups, it's a lot, you have to be very, very proactive to reach this group. You can't just put out a newsletter and expect them to sign up for your project. So you really have to go out there and talk to them and convince them, and also maybe find a way to reimburse them or something, because it's also always in citizen science, if you take up so much of your time, then it's very it's just a polite thing to do, to give you like 50 euros for your 3-4 hours of work. I mean, it should be in your budget. Yeah, that's my that's my perspective.
No.
Yeah, trust building, I think, is really important, and acknowledging the time it will take and the fact you need to start building trust slowly. And so I think this idea of having to go out is important. Like I said, with one of the heritage collections projects from a presentation I mentioned, that exercise was an exercise in trust building as much as anything else. Participants in these studies, when I speak to researchers in the medical school, before they get directly involved, it can last 3 or 5 years before they're actively doing citizen science. It's a long process of working with the communities on their schedules, their timelines, meeting their needs, making sure you have funding to pay for their taxis so they can come in, or ideally meeting them in their spaces. and just accepting that it's going to take a long, long while, and the more distant the group is, the longer it will take. And that is, again, an instance where you're going to have to convince people that you need to do this. And you're going to have setbacks, and you're going to find that people won't want to come in, or they'll want to do something else. And you just need to accept these things. And that is very, very difficult, because then you do need to convince people that while you're not producing outputs, you are working towards them, but you're doing it in a respectful way where people can feel included. Yeah, so the answer is it's incredibly difficult and long and slow if you want to do it right, but you need to accept that that's what you need to do.
Well, yeah, it's very important, it's very difficult, and to be honest, it was not a very important goal in our project or our projects. We rather wanted to have the low-hanging fruits, and to start and to build a community, and afterwards to expand this community. So we did not start with marginalized groups, and we still have mostly white, educated, older men. So of course, it's a very important issue, but I cannot tell you that we successfully addressed marginalized or vulnerable groups with our projects. Maybe in this fostering forced fostering project, but this was only one small thing what we did.
Thank you very much, everyone. Now we will have a short break, 15 minutes, and then we will start the next session. Please remember to use the other WebEx link to join the next session. Claudia?
Tomaremos ahora una pausa, haremos un break, comenzaremos puntualmente a las 11 horas de Santiago de Chile y a las 3 horas en Europa. Recuerden unirse a la próxima sesión utilizando el enlace de registro de WebEx correspondiente. Muchas gracias a los participantes y los speakers.
Thank you very much, everyone. See you at 11 or 3 p.m. European time. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.